My girlfriend said if I really respected her, I should pay her mom and dad's bills, continuing that true guys love their wife's parents, and this would determine if we could be together. So I said okay. Then within a few days, I declined the engagement party, after which all her relatives came to my house wanting to know what happened. Sup Reddit, my name is Marcus, and I'm 26 years old. I work as a regional sales manager for an industrial machinery company here in Ohio. Before you ask, no, it's not glamorous at all. I spend my days selling things like conveyor belts, warehouse equipment, and heavy machinery to factories across 3 states. But here's the thing, I'm really good at it. I clear about $72,000 a year plus quarterly bonuses, and in good years I can push myself over $80,000. Now here's where my story becomes important, because understanding my background is crucial to grasping how thoroughly I got played. I grew up dirt poor, and I mean the kind of poor where you're eating instant noodles for dinner 4 nights a week. My dad walked out when I was 11, leaving my mom to raise 3 kids on a waitress salary. We got evicted twice before I turned 16, and I wore the same pair of jeans to school for 2 years straight because we couldn't afford new clothes. I swore on everything I held sacred that I would never, ever be broke again. From the moment I got my first real job at 22, I've been obsessive about saving money, emergency fund, retirement account, the whole 9 yards. By 26, I had about $41,000 in savings and owned a small house that I'd bought with an FHA loan 2 years prior. That background is absolutely crucial for understanding what happened next. I met Victoria at a friend's barbecue about 2 years ago. She was 24 and absolutely gorgeous. I'm talking model-level beautiful here. She had long blonde hair, a perfect smile, and was the kind of woman who gets free drinks just for existing. At the time, she was working part-time at this boutique clothing store that charged $75 for basic t-shirts. For some reason, she was interested in me, a regular-looking guy who sells industrial equipment and drives a 5-year-old Honda Accord. That should have been red flag number 1, but I was thinking with the wrong head. Victoria came from what she described as a successful family. Her dad, Robert, owned 2 Subway franchises in nice parts of town, while her mom, Linda, ran a small catering business that did events for the local country club crowd. They lived in this beautiful house in Riverside Estates. You know, one of those subdivisions where all the houses look the same but cost $280,000. Her younger sister, Samantha, was 21, still living at home and working part-time at a tanning salon when she felt like showing up. According to the family, Samantha was finding herself and exploring her options. The family dynamic was weird from the beginning. Everything revolved around making sure Victoria was happy. They constantly talked about her high school modeling photos, the fact that she'd done exactly 1 local car dealership commercial, her business degree, which was actually just an associate's degree from community college, and how she deserved the best of everything in life. During family dinners, Robert would go on and on about how Victoria was too good for this town, and how she needed someone who could appreciate her worth. Linda would nod along and make comments about how Victoria's friends were all dating men who knew how to treat a lady right. I thought they were just proud parents being supportive of their daughter. Turns out they were actually interviewing me for the position of family ATM. The financial manipulation started small and felt completely normal at first. Victoria would suggest we go to nice restaurants, then get quiet and withdrawn when the check arrived, staying silent until I automatically reached for my wallet. She'd mention wanting something, a new purse, shoes, whatever caught her eye, then get this sad, disappointed look when I didn't immediately offer to buy it for her. "I just thought since you're doing so well financially," she'd say with this little pout that made me feel like a complete ass for not reading her mind. So naturally, I'd end up buying the purse or the shoes or the $115 perfume she'd fallen in love with at Macy's. Each time, she'd be so grateful and loving afterward that I felt like I was being the best boyfriend in the world. After about 6 months of dating, the requests became more direct and substantial. Her car needed new tires, $620, and could I help out just this once? Her mom's catering van broke down, and they needed it fixed to save the business. That was $1,750, and it was presented as an emergency where they'd pay me back as soon as the insurance money came through. Spoiler alert, the insurance money never came through, and I never saw a penny of that loan again. Every single time I hesitated or showed any reluctance, Victoria had a perfectly crafted response ready. "I thought we were building something together," she'd say, looking hurt and confused. Or, "My family has always been generous with people they care about," implying that my hesitation showed I didn't really care about them. The guilt trips were surgical in their precision, designed to make me feel selfish and small for even questioning these requests. But the real masterpiece was when she'd compare me to other guys in her social circle. Madison's boyfriend bought her a $1,900 necklace just because it was Tuesday, she mentioned once while we were walking through the mall, her voice carefully casual. He said he wanted her to know how much she meant to him. Guess what I bought her the next week? That's right. I spent $2,000 on a necklace because I couldn't stand the thought of being seen as less generous than Madison's mysterious boyfriend. After we got engaged, I proposed after 14 months because I genuinely thought she was the one. The financial demands became an absolute flood. Christmas shopping for her family became my responsibility because you're practically a son to them now. That cost me $1,350. Her dad's restaurant equipment unexpectedly broke down, and he needed a quick loan of $2,700 to avoid losing business and disappointing his customers. Every single time, it was positioned as a one-time emergency that would never happen again. Every single time, Victoria would be so grateful and loving afterward that I felt like the best boyfriend in the world. And every single time, the money disappeared forever into the black hole of their family finances. But I didn't see the pattern yet because I was too busy being grateful that someone like her could love someone like me. The wake-up call came 3 months before our scheduled wedding date, during what was supposed to be a romantic dinner at Romano's, this fancy Italian place that Victoria loved and where we'd celebrated our engagement. "So, Marcus," Victoria said, twirling pasta around her fork but not actually eating any of it. I was halfway through my chicken marsala when she spoke, and something in her tone made me put down my fork immediately. By this point in our relationship, I'd learned that when Victoria started conversations this way, it usually meant bad news involving her parents that would somehow end with me writing a check. "Mom and Dad got some really bad news today," she continued, looking up at me with these big, concerned eyes that I'd come to recognize as her standard prelude to a financial request. "What kind of bad news?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling about where this conversation was headed. "The bank called them this morning," she said, her voice taking on that carefully modulated tone of concern. "They're behind on the house payments and some other things, like, really behind. They might lose everything." I felt my stomach drop into my shoes. Robert and Linda losing their house would be genuinely terrible. Despite everything that had happened, I'd grown to care about them as people. "How behind are they?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to know the scope of the problem. "It's not even that much, really," Victoria said, waving her hand dismissively as if we were discussing pocket change. "The banker said if they could come up with $45,000, it would get them completely current and give them some breathing room to get back on their feet." $45,000. That number hit me like a physical blow. That was more than I made in a year after taxes. That was almost my entire life savings. The emergency fund I'd been building since I was 22. The down payment for our future house. Everything I'd worked for since swearing I'd never be poor again. "Victoria, that's basically everything I have saved," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her expression shifted slightly, and for just a second, I saw something cold and calculating flicker across her face before the concerned, loving look returned. "I know it's a lot, baby. But think about it," she said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "We're getting married in 3 months anyway. What's yours is going to be mine, and what's mine is going to be yours, right?" The way she said it made my blood run cold. This wasn't, "Could you help?" or "Is there any way?" This was, "If you really loved me, you'd just take care of this." It wasn't a request. It was a test, and there was only one acceptable answer in her mind. "Marcus, you're so smart with money and planning and everything," she continued, her grip on my hand getting tighter. "If you really loved me, you'd just take care of this. Think of it as an early wedding gift to me and my family. My parents practically raised me by themselves," she went on, her voice taking on that practiced tone of emotional manipulation I was starting to recognize. "They sacrificed everything to give me and Samantha the best life possible. They deserve to enjoy their golden years without worrying about money. This is what real men do for their families." I sat there staring at her, and it was like someone had suddenly turned on all the lights in a dark room. Every expensive dinner where I'd automatically paid the $145 bill. Every emergency that had required my immediate financial intervention. Every guilt trip about how her family had always been generous with people they cared about. I wasn't her fiancé. I was her retirement plan. Hell, I was her entire family's retirement plan. "So," she said, squeezing my hand and smiling expectantly. Can we go to the bank tomorrow and get this taken care of? I looked at Victoria, really looked at her, and suddenly saw a complete stranger sitting across from me. This beautiful woman I'd been planning to marry, planning to build a life with, was sitting there asking me to liquidate my entire future to bail out her parents' poor financial decisions. And she was asking like it was the most reasonable thing in the world, like any loving partner would obviously empty their life savings without question. I pulled my hand back slowly and gave her the most deliberate nod of my life. I understand, I said quietly. The relief that washed over her face was immediate and absolutely nauseating. She actually clapped her hands together like a little kid who'd just been told she was getting a pony for Christmas. Oh my God, thank you, baby, she exclaimed, practically bouncing in her seat. I knew you'd come through for us. You're literally saving our family. She was beaming now, already pulling out her phone with excitement. I'm going to call Mom and Dad right now and tell them the good news. They're going to be so relieved, so grateful. This is going to change everything for us. No, I said, standing up and placing my napkin on the table. Don't call them yet. Let me figure out the logistics first. I needed time to think, time to process what had just happened, and time to plan my next move. Of course, you're so thoughtful, she said, standing up too and wrapping me in a tight hug. Always thinking everything through. This is why I love you so much. This is why I knew you were the one. The drive back to her parents' house was silent, except for Victoria chattering excitedly about how relieved her parents were going to be, how this would give them a fresh start, and how we should probably postpone our honeymoon for a year or two to give me time to rebuild the wedding fund. How thoughtful of her to plan my financial future for me. I dropped her off with a kiss and watched her practically skip up the walkway to the front door. She was probably inside telling her family the good news before I'd even backed out of the driveway. I could picture the celebration happening in that living room. The relief, the excitement, the congratulations on successfully extracting another sucker's life savings. I drove home in a complete daze, my mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. $45,000. My entire safety net gone. And for what? To bail out people who'd probably just end up in the same situation again in 2 years when they'd burned through my money and needed another bailout. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd made my decision. Victoria wanted to find out what kind of man I really was. She was about to get a freaking masterclass. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, a legal pad, and about 2 years' worth of financial records spread out like I was planning the D-Day invasion. What I found when I started digging through everything made me physically sick to my stomach. I'd been tracking my expenses pretty carefully since college. Poor kid habits die hard. So I had detailed records of everything. Every dinner, every gift, every emergency loan that had never been repaid. I made a comprehensive spreadsheet and started itemizing every single expense related to Victoria and her family over the course of our relationship. The big ticket items were bad enough when I laid them all out. There was the $2,700 loan to Robert for restaurant equipment that was supposedly an emergency. The $1,750 for Linda's catering van repairs that insurance was going to cover, but never did. The $1,620 for Victoria's emergency car repairs that couldn't wait. The $1,350 for Christmas gifts for her family, because I was practically a son to them now. The $2,050 for her engagement party that her family had insisted on throwing. The $820 for that necklace after she'd mentioned Madison's boyfriend, and his spontaneous $1,900 gift. But it was the death by 1,000 cuts that really got to me when I started adding it all up. Every fancy dinner where I automatically paid the $145 bill without question. The $190 spa day I'd bought her just because she'd had a stressful week. The designer purse she'd wanted for her birthday. The weekend trips where I'd covered the hotel and meals for both of us without even thinking about it. 22 months of dating. When I finished tallying everything up, the number that appeared on my screen was $18,967 in total expenses that were above and beyond normal relationship costs. $18,967. That number just sat there on my screen, mocking me like a neon sign advertising my stupidity. Almost 19 grand in less than 2 years. And now they wanted another $45,000 on top of it. I stared at that spreadsheet until my eyes burned, trying to process how I'd let this happen. How I'd been so blind to what was clearly a systematic extraction of my finances. But here's where it gets interesting. and where my background in industrial sales actually came in handy. One of the benefits of working in this industry is that you develop contacts everywhere: factories, warehouses, banks, you name it. So I decided to do a little research into this emergency that supposedly required my entire life savings to solve. I called my buddy Steve, who works as a loan officer at First National, the same bank that holds Robert and Linda's mortgage. We'd done some business together over the years, and we had our monthly networking coffee meetings where we'd talk shop and share industry gossip. After a few casual, carefully worded questions during our next meeting, I learned some very interesting facts about the Martinez family's financial situation. Robert and Linda were indeed behind on their mortgage payments, but only by a few months, nothing that would typically trigger an immediate foreclosure. What they were really drowning in was everything else. There were the payments on Linda's brand new BMW that she'd bought 6 months earlier, the loan on Robert's boat that he'd purchased for family bonding time, the second mortgage they'd taken out to renovate their kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, the multiple credit lines they'd used to buy new equipment for the catering business, business loans that were already in default from previous equipment purchases. The emergency wasn't just about saving the house, they were facing a complete financial collapse because they'd systematically overextended themselves on luxury purchases and lifestyle inflation. And now they wanted me to bail them out so they could keep their lifestyle without making any actual sacrifices or changes to their spending habits. The more I dug, the clearer it became that they'd either manipulated the truth when they told Victoria about their situation, or Victoria was completely in on the deception. Either way, I was being played for the biggest sucker in Ohio, and the realization made me feel sick and furious in equal measure. That's when I stopped feeling guilty about my decision and started feeling dangerous. I opened a new spreadsheet and titled it Project Nuclear Option. I was going to do a complete financial audit of everything that had happened. I was going to document every single manipulation, every guilt trip that had ended with me opening my wallet, every time they'd treated me like their personal bank account. And then I was going to burn their whole world down. But first, I had some phone calls to make. Canceling a wedding 3 months out is expensive as hell, but it's a lot cheaper than $45,000 plus a lifetime of financial servitude to people who saw me as nothing more than a walking ATM. I started calling vendors Wednesday morning, working my way through the list of everything Victoria and I had booked together. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, the DJ, the florist, one by one, I canceled everything we'd spent months planning. "I'm so sorry to do this," I told Rita from Hillcrest Manor, our wedding venue, "but the engagement is off." "Oh, honey, I'm sorry to hear that," she said, and she genuinely sounded sympathetic rather than just concerned about her business. "Was it something sudden?" "You could say that," I replied. "My fiancée just informed me that if I really loved her, I'd pay off her parents $45,000 in debt as a wedding present." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Jesus Christ, sweetie, run!" Rita finally said. "Just run!" I've been in this business for 15 years, and I've seen this exact scenario play out before. It never gets better, only worse. The caterer was less sympathetic but remained professional about the cancellation. I lost my $780 deposit there, which stung but wasn't unexpected. The photographer was a complete bitch about the whole thing. She kept her entire $1,750 down payment, claiming it was clearly stated in the contract that cancellations within 90 days forfeited all deposits. The DJ was actually cool about it and only charged me a $190 cancellation fee instead of keeping the full $580 deposit, which I appreciated. All told, I was out about $4,200 in lost deposits and cancellation fees. It was expensive, sure, but it felt like a bargain compared to the alternative of marrying into a family that viewed me as their personal retirement fund. By Wednesday evening, our wedding existed only as a series of line items on my credit card statement. I felt this weird mix of grief and relief washing over me. Sad that the relationship was over and that I'd been so thoroughly deceived, but free from the constant financial pressure I'd been living under for nearly 2 years. Now came the hard part, telling Victoria that her gravy train had just derailed. I spent an hour crafting the perfect text message. It needed to be clear, final, and leave absolutely no room for negotiation or misinterpretation. "Victoria, the wedding is canceled. I will not be paying your parents' debt. This is not the partnership I want for my life. I'll arrange to have the engagement ring returned. Please don't contact me again." I read that message 20 times, took a deep breath, and hit send. Then I immediately blocked her number, blocked her on all social media platforms, and blocked her parents and Samantha for good measure. I made myself a sandwich, sat on my couch, and waited for the nuclear fallout to begin. I didn't have to wait long. The harassment started that very night, and it was clear they'd coordinated their response. My phone started ringing from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably Victoria using her friends' phones to try to get through to me. When I didn't answer those calls, the voicemail started rolling in. First was Samantha. "Marcus, what the freak is wrong with you? Victoria is completely heartbroken. You can't just abandon people who love you because of money." Then Linda. "Marcus, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Victoria says you think we lied about something. We need to talk this through like adults." Finally, Robert. "Marcus, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you're making a huge mistake. Call me back immediately." I deleted all of them without listening to the full messages. I'd heard enough to know that they were sticking to their script. I was the villain who'd abandoned poor Victoria over money, rather than someone who'd refused to be financially exploited. Thursday was more of the same harassment, but with added creativity on their part. Someone had signed me up for every spam mailing list they could find, and I started getting calls about extended car warranties, solar panels, and timeshare opportunities at all hours of the day. Pizza deliveries I didn't order started showing up at my house, sometimes multiple orders from different restaurants in a single evening. But Friday morning was when they really escalated their campaign. I was walking into our office building around 8:30 a.m. when Miranda from reception practically tackled me in the lobby. "Marcus, thank God you're here," she said, looking frazzled and stressed. "There's a situation. Some people are here demanding to see you, and they're making a scene." I could hear Robert's voice booming through the entire first floor of our building from 3 hallways away. He was saying something about cowardice and abandoning family in their time of need. His voice carrying that aggressive tone I remembered from the restaurant. My boss Carol intercepted me before I could get anywhere near the lobby. She's this tiny woman in her 50s who radiates authority like a nuclear reactor radiates heat. "Your personal drama is currently being broadcast to my entire staff," she said, in her deadly calm voice that every employee had learned to fear. "Whatever this is about, you need to handle it immediately." "I can explain," I started. "Handle it first, explain it later," she cut me off. The scene in the main lobby was pure theater when I finally made it there. Victoria was sitting in one of the chairs, crying these huge dramatic tears while clutching tissues like her life depended on it. Linda was standing behind her doing this hand-wringing performance while telling anyone who would listen about what a heartless monster I was. Robert was pacing back and forth, his face red as a tomato, occasionally pointing toward the elevator and demanding that someone get that coward down here to face what he'd done. And Samantha, freaking Samantha, was recording everything on her phone like she was gathering evidence for some kind of legal case or planning to post it all over social media. They'd cornered poor Miranda at the reception desk and were forcing her to listen to their sob story about how I'd cruelly abandoned Victoria in her darkest hour of need. The entire lobby had become their stage, and they were putting on the performance of their lives for anyone unfortunate enough to be within earshot. "Marcus!" Robert spotted me first, his voice carrying across the entire lobby like he was announcing a boxing match. "There you are. You don't end an engagement over a goddamn text message. You're going to march your ass down to First National right now and fix this situation." Every employee in the building stopped what they were doing. People were coming out of offices, gathering around the edges of the lobby, pretending to check their phones while obviously listening to every single word. This was supposed to be a public humiliation campaign. They figured if they made enough of a scene at my workplace, I'd cave just to make it stop and save my professional reputation. "This is my workplace, Robert," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. "We're not doing this here. We'll do this wherever we damn well please." Linda's voice pitched higher, making sure everyone could hear her. "You humiliated our daughter. You broke her heart and destroyed our family because you're too selfish to help people who love you." Victoria looked up from her crying just long enough to deliver her line. "How could you do this to us, Marcus? We trusted you. We opened our hearts to you." The performance was actually impressive in its coordination and commitment to the dramatic narrative they'd constructed. I had to admire the level of planning that had gone into this public ambush. "My decision is final," I said, looking directly at Victoria. "This is over." That's when Carol appeared next to me like an avenging angel in a business suit. "Is there a problem here?" Carol asked in a voice that could freeze liquid nitrogen. She had this way of speaking that made even the most aggressive contractors shut their mouths and listen. Robert made the critical error of trying to intimidate her. "This is a private family matter, lady," he said, puffing out his chest like he was dealing with some timid secretary. "Mind your own business." Big mistake. Huge. It became my business the moment you started disrupting my workplace and harassing my employees, Carol replied, her voice getting quieter and more dangerous with each word. "You have exactly 30 seconds to remove yourselves from this building voluntarily, or I'm calling security to have you escorted out for trespassing. And if you ever set foot in here again, I'll have you arrested." The transformation on Robert's face was beautiful to watch. He was clearly used to bullying people into submission with his aggressive behavior and loud voice, but Carol had been managing construction projects and dealing with angry contractors for 20 years. A middle-aged guy throwing a tantrum over his daughter's love life was barely a warm-up exercise for her. "You can't," he started, but Carol was already pulling out her phone. 20 seconds, she said calmly, her finger hovering over the keypad. They left, all four of them, muttering threats and promises that this wasn't over. But not before Victoria looked me dead in the eyes and delivered her parting shot. "You're going to regret this for the rest of your life." As soon as they were out the door, Carol turned to me with that expression that meant I was about to get a lecture. My office now, I spent the next 30 minutes explaining the whole situation to Carol. The escalating money demands, the systematic manipulation, the final $45,000 ultimatum that had been presented as a test of my love. By the end of it, she was shaking her head in disbelief. "Jesus, Marcus, you dodged a bullet the size of a freight train," she said, leaning back in her chair. "But this better not happen again. I like you, but I won't have my workplace turned into a circus because of your personal drama." "It won't happen again," I promised, and I meant it. "Good," she said. "Now get back to work, and maybe consider changing your phone number while you're at it." I knew the office scene was just the opening act of what was probably going to be a much longer campaign. This family had shown me they were willing to escalate their tactics when they didn't get what they wanted, and I was about to find out exactly how far they'd go to try to break me down. What followed was 2 months of psychological warfare that would have impressed military strategists with its coordination and persistence. The social media campaign launched that weekend, with Samantha spearheading a coordinated assault across Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. The posts were masterfully crafted for maximum damage to my reputation. "Some people will use love as a weapon to control and manipulate others," read one post. "So proud of my sister for finding the strength to escape narcissistic abuse," read another. The words financial abuse and gaslighting appeared frequently, along with carefully chosen photos of Victoria looking beautiful and sad, family photos from happier times, and screenshots of inspirational quotes about surviving abuse. Nothing was specific enough to be legally actionable, but everything was definitely designed to destroy my reputation with anyone who knew us. The really insidious part was how they mixed in just enough truth to make it believable. Yes, I had ended our engagement suddenly. Yes, it was over money. But they conveniently left out the part where they demanded I liquidate my life savings to bail them out of their financial irresponsibility. Then came the escalated harassment campaign that went far beyond angry voicemails. Pizza deliveries started showing up at all hours of the night, sometimes 3 or 4 different orders from different restaurants in a single evening. I'd wake up to find delivery drivers at my door at 2 a.m. with orders I'd never placed, all paid for with fake credit card information that would probably bounce back to the restaurants later. Someone had signed me up for subscriptions to magazines I'd never heard of. Everything from obscure hobby publications to adult content that started showing up in my mailbox. They'd also signed me up for information packets from every MLM company in existence, so my mailbox was constantly stuffed with promises of financial freedom through selling essential oils, weight loss supplements, and kitchen gadgets. The Jehovah's Witnesses started showing up at my door every Saturday morning with remarkable persistence. I'm pretty sure someone had told them I was seeking spiritual guidance and going through a crisis of faith, because they kept coming back week after week with increasingly concerned offers to help me find my way. But the most damaging part of their campaign was when they started targeting my professional reputation directly. Fake reviews began appearing for our company online, claiming I'd provided terrible service, overcharged clients for equipment, and was unprofessional and unreliable in my business dealings. Someone called our main office pretending to be from a medical licensing board, claiming there were ethics violations they needed to investigate regarding me. Another call came from someone pretending to be from the Better Business Bureau with alleged fraud complaints. Carol was getting increasingly pissed about the whole situation. "This needs to stop, Marcus," she told me after the third fake complaint call in a single week. "I've had to waste time dealing with these bullshit calls, and it's starting to affect our business reputation. Whatever you need to do to make this end, do it." But here's what Victoria and her family didn't understand about me. I'm not just organized, I'm methodical. And I'd been documenting absolutely everything from the moment this harassment campaign started. Every fake review was screenshot with timestamps. Every harassment call was recorded when legally possible. Every piece of spam mail was photographed and saved. Every social media post was archived before they could delete it. I was building a case that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Meanwhile, I decided to do some research of my own into the people who were making my life hell. Public records are amazing things when you know where to look and what questions to ask. A little digging revealed that Robert and Linda's financial situation was way worse than I'd originally thought when I'd talked to my banker friend. They weren't just behind on a few payments like I'd been led to believe. They were leveraged to the absolute limit on everything they owned. The house didn't just have a second mortgage. It had a third one disguised as a home equity line of credit that they'd maxed out. Both of Linda's business vehicles were financed at predatory interest rates because their credit was already shot. Robert's franchise fees were 6 months in arrears, and corporate was already initiating termination procedures against both locations. They weren't successful business owners living slightly above their means. They were a house of cards built entirely on credit and held together by sheer audacity and the fantasy that someone else would always be there to bail them out. And I was about to become a very strong wind that would blow their whole structure down. The first domino fell when I decided to sue Victoria for the engagement ring. In Ohio, an engagement ring is considered a conditional gift, meaning it's given with the expectation that marriage will follow. When the engagement ends, regardless of who ends it or why, the ring legally has to be returned to whoever purchased it. The ring had cost me $8,600. Not huge money in the grand scheme of things, but not pocket change either. Victoria hired a lawyer with money she probably didn't have to fight the ring case. Their argument was that I'd given the ring as an unconditional expression of love and that I'd breached our relationship contract by refusing to support her family in their time of need. They were trying to paint me as someone who'd used financial control to manipulate the relationship. My lawyer Dave was ready for that argument. He introduced my meticulously documented spreadsheet showing nearly $19,000 in financial manipulation over the course of our relationship. He wasn't presenting it as a bill I was trying to collect, but as evidence that the engagement had been obtained under false pretenses from the very beginning. "Your Honor," Dave said during our hearing, "the defendant and her family systematically extracted money from my client over the course of their relationship, culminating in a demand that he liquidate his entire life savings to pay their personal debts. When he refused, they launched a coordinated harassment campaign designed to destroy his reputation and livelihood. The engagement was clearly based on financial extraction rather than genuine affection. He presented printouts of the social media posts, evidence of the harassment campaign, and witness statements from my coworkers about the office incident where her family had tried to publicly humiliate me into compliance. The judge wasn't impressed with their side of the story. Victoria's lawyer tried to paint me as a controlling manipulator who'd kept detailed financial records to maintain power over the relationship. But when pressed for specific examples of this alleged controlling behavior, the best they could come up with was that I'd kept detailed financial records and made unilateral decisions about the wedding. Yeah, the unilateral decision to not bankrupt myself for people who saw me as a piggy bank. The judge ruled in my favor without much deliberation. Victoria was ordered to return the ring or pay its appraised value of $8,600 within 30 days. Since she didn't have $8,600 sitting around, Dave obtained a judgment against her and began garnishment proceedings against her part-time income from the boutique. But here's where things got really interesting, and where karma started doing the heavy lifting for me. About 3 months after I won the ring case, Robert and Linda's financial house of cards started collapsing on its own. And it turned out they'd been in much worse shape than even I'd realized from my initial research. The Subway corporate office had been investigating Robert's franchises for months due to unpaid fees and violations of franchise agreements. When they finally terminated his franchise rights, he was forced to close both locations immediately. This wasn't just a temporary setback. It was a complete business failure that left him with no income and massive debts from equipment leases and unpaid suppliers. Linda's catering business had been operating on borrowed time too. She'd been using business credit cards to cover personal expenses for months and had fallen behind on commercial rent for her kitchen space. When her landlord evicted the catering company for non-payment, she lost all her commercial equipment to cover unpaid debts. The business that was supposed to be their financial salvation was gone overnight. Without income from either business, Robert and Linda couldn't keep up with any of their payments. The house payments, the car payments, the credit cards, the business loans, everything went into default simultaneously. It was like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. The foreclosure process took about 7 months from start to finish. During that time, I watched from a distance as their entire lifestyle unraveled piece by piece. Robert ended up having to take a job as an assistant manager at someone else's Subway for $12 an hour. A humiliating come-down from being a franchise owner. Linda got hired as a server at Applebee's, working double shifts just to make ends meet. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in the worst part of town, a far cry from their beautiful house in Riverside Estates. Victoria, who'd never held a full-time job in her adult life, discovered that living without mommy and daddy's financial support was harder than she'd ever imagined. She bounced between a few different jobs, call center work, retail, food service, never lasting more than a few months anywhere. Turns out that when you've spent your entire adult life being financially supported by your parents and having someone else pay for everything, developing a work ethic and dealing with actual responsibility is quite the adjustment. Samantha had to get a real job too, which was probably the biggest shock to her system. It turns out the part-time tanning salon gig wasn't enough to cover her car payments when her parents stopped subsidizing her lifestyle. She actually had to face the reality that most 21-year-olds deal with, working full-time to support yourself. The begging started about 8 months after I'd ended the engagement. Robert called me first, and his voice was completely different from the angry, demanding tone he'd used in my office lobby. Now he sounded broken, desperate, like a man who'd run out of options and was grasping at straws. "Marcus, please, I know how this looks," he said, his voice shaking with what sounded like genuine panic. "But we're drowning here. Maybe we can work something out. Maybe you and Victoria can try again." "Robert," I said, keeping my voice calm and measured, "if Victoria really loved me, she never would have asked me to bankrupt myself for your debt. We both know this was never about love." I hung up on him without another word. Linda tried next, showing up at my office building during lunch hour. Security wouldn't let her up to my floor, but she waited by my car in the parking garage like some kind of desperate stalker. When I came down to leave for the day, there she was, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, please," she said, reaching out toward me like she was drowning and I was a life preserver. "I made a mistake. We all made mistakes. But we're losing everything." "Linda," I replied, stopping a safe distance away from her. "You're not losing everything because of me. You're losing everything because you spent money you didn't have and made financial decisions you couldn't afford. But if you and Victoria could work things out," she started, but I cut her off. "Linda, your daughter looked me in the eye and told me that if I really loved her, I'd liquidate my life savings to pay your debts. That's not love, that's financial manipulation." She stood there crying in the parking garage as I drove away. I felt bad for about 30 seconds, then remembered the coordinated office ambush and the months of harassment that had followed. But my favorite interaction was when Victoria herself finally called. She'd gotten a new number and had apparently decided to try a completely different approach than the anger and manipulation that had characterized our relationship. "Marcus, please," she said, her voice shaking with what sounded like genuine panic rather than the calculated emotional manipulation I remembered. "I'm sorry, okay? I made a mistake. I didn't understand how bad things were going to get. Can't we try again? I know we can make this work if we both try." The desperation in her voice was almost satisfying. Almost. "Victoria, let me ask you something," I said, leaning back in my chair and enjoying this moment more than I probably should have. "Do you remember what you told me at Romano's that night?" "Aye, what do you mean?" she stammered. "You said that if I really loved you, I'd pay your parents' debt. Do you remember saying that?" "Yes, but well, if you really love your parents," I interrupted, "you'll get a full-time job and start helping them pay their debts yourself. But we both know you're not going to do that, are you?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out how to respond to that. "Marcus, please, you're destroying my family over money," she finally said, falling back on the same guilt trip that had worked so many times before. No, Victoria, I'm refusing to be destroyed by your family for money. There's a big difference. I'll do anything, please. We can start over, she pleaded. Anything except get a real job and take responsibility for your own family's finances, right? I hung up and blocked that number too. Last I heard from a mutual friend who still keeps tabs on the local drama, Victoria is still bouncing between jobs and living in a studio apartment that's about the size of my old bedroom. She's discovered that maintaining the lifestyle she was accustomed to requires either wealthy parents or an actual career, and she's unwilling to do the work required for the latter. Robert is still working at Subway and had started driving for DoorDash on weekends just to make ends meet. The man who used to lecture me about appreciating Victoria's worth is now delivering fast food to college students for tips. Linda is working double shifts at Applebee's and has developed serious health problems from the stress of their financial collapse. The woman who used to cater events for the country club crowd is now taking orders for buffalo wings and asking if people want to add mozzarella sticks to their meal. Samantha had actually turned her life around the most out of all of them, which was genuinely surprising. She'd gotten a full-time job at a medical office and was taking night classes to become a dental hygienist. Apparently, being forced to support herself had given her some much-needed perspective on reality and the value of hard work. Sometimes, tough circumstances really do build character, though it's unfortunate it took a complete family financial collapse to teach her that lesson. I don't feel guilty about what happened to them, and I think that's the part that would surprise some people. They made their choices based on greed, entitlement, and the assumption that someone else would always be there to fund their lifestyle. I made mine based on self-preservation and basic financial sanity. The only difference is that my choices were grounded in reality, while theirs were based on the fantasy that other people existed to solve their problems. Sometimes the best revenge isn't hurting someone. It's just refusing to save them from the consequences of their own actions. They wanted to test what kind of man I really was, to see if I would sacrifice my financial security for their comfort. Well, they got their answer. I'm the kind of man who works hard for his money, saves responsibly for the future, and refuses to be manipulated into funding other people's poor decisions. Victoria thought she could use love as leverage to extract my life savings. Her parents thought they could guilt me into bailing them out of their financial irresponsibility. They all learned that there are some people in this world who won't be manipulated. No matter how pretty the package or how sob-worthy the story, I'm still living in my same house, still working the same job, and my savings account has recovered and grown beyond what it was before I met Victoria. I learned to recognize financial manipulation tactics, and I've become much better at setting boundaries in relationships. Most importantly, I learned that when someone shows you who they really are through their actions, you should believe them the first time. The woman I'm seeing now has her own career, her own savings account, and has never once suggested that my money should solve her family's problems. We split dinner checks. We both contribute to our shared activities, and when one of us needs help, we ask rather than demand. It's amazing how much more enjoyable a relationship can be when it's actually a partnership instead of a financial extraction scheme. Looking back, I can see that Victoria and her family did me a favor by showing their true colors before the wedding. Imagine if I'd married into that family and then discovered their expectation that I'd fund their lifestyle indefinitely. Imagine the years of guilt trips, emergencies, and financial demands that would have followed. Imagine trying to build a future with someone who saw your bank account as the most important thing about you. I dodged a bullet the size of a freight train, and all it cost me was some canceled wedding deposits and a few months of harassment. Considering the alternative was a lifetime of being treated like a human ATM, I'd say I got off pretty cheap.